From bombing his clarinet solos in front of an audience to getting caught red-handed in his own ridiculous schemes, Squidward has a special talent for turning every situation into a complete embarrassment. Let's dive into the most cringe-worthy moments where Squidward made himself look like a total fool. In Squidville, Squidward trades in Bikini Bottom for a quiet town of perfect Squidwards, only to find out that living among his own kind is just as humiliating as being stuck with SpongeBob and Patrick. Let's just say Squidward's dream life quickly turns into a nightmare of his own making. Launch his house into oblivion instead. At this point, Squidward decides he's done, finished, kaput. Luckily for him, divine intervention, as in TV commercial, introduces him to Tentacle Acres, a squid utopia where everyone looks, acts, and snores like him. Paradise, right? Wrong. Squidward wastes no time in moving in. Bro is desperate to ditch Bikini Bottom. It's official, Bro thinks he's in squid heaven. He bikes with the other squids, buys canned bread, just ew, signs up for interpretive dance classes, and joins in on crappy clarinet playing, all while blissfully ignoring SpongeBob and Patrick's attempts to call and apologize. At first, Squidward is living the dream, but plot twist, monotony hits harder than one of Patrick's belly flops. Every day is the same. Bike, bread, dance, rinse, repeat. You get the picture. Suddenly, Squidward realizes he's not thriving, he's surviving in a squid-flavored dystopia. Cue his breakdown. Yep, you'd think Squiddy Boy would have learned his lesson, but nope. He starts playing with the reef blower like a kid who found their dad's leaf blower thingy, scaring the other squids into forming an angry mob. SpongeBob and Patrick, meanwhile, crash Tentacle Acres thanks to Patrick's weaponized bad breath. Don't ask. They stumble upon the chaos but can't even recognize Squidward among the sea of identical squids. Squidward, now fully feral, grabs the reef blower and yeets himself out of the village like some tentacled Braveheart. Oh, Squidward, you'd think moving would get you off the hook, but no one escapes judgment, especially not you, my dude. False representation. The crime? Squidward joined Tentacle Acres pretending he'd fit right in with their rigid squid conformity. Newsflash, he doesn't. Sentence? Fines between $1,000 and $5,000, and let's be real, his reputation is in shreds. He's officially that guy who thought he could fake it in paradise. Disturbing the peace. The crime? Turning Tentacle Acres into Squidville Chaos Edition by riding reef blowers like a madman. Sentence? Fines up to $2,500 and mandatory community service. Maybe he can teach interpretive dance as penance. Tentacle Acres was supposed to be his sanctuary, but all it gave him was canned bread and a midlife crisis. Now let's dive into Band Geeks, where Squidward's desperation to impress Squilliam leads him to form a band with the most unlikely group of musicians. Spoiler alert, Squidward's idea of music quickly turns into an embarrassing disaster. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and Squidward is the conductor. Squidward is mid-clarinet practice, aka ear torture, and gets mistaken for a dying animal by a passing doctor. And honestly, fair.
I understand you have a dying animal on the premises.
Then his arch-nemesis, Squilliam Fancyson, calls just to flex about his Bubble Bowl band gig. So naturally, Squidward lies through his tentacles and swears he's got one, apparently losing with dignity is for cowards. Cue Squidward stapling Join My Band flyers all over Bikini Bottom and somehow roping in the town's most musically illiterate citizens. First rehearsal, a complete train wreck. Instruments are abused, Patrick gets shoved into a trombone, Sandy drops MMA-level violence on anyone who steps out of line, and don't even get me started on Plankton sprinting marathons across his harmonica. Fitness goals, but not the vibe. By day 4, tensions boil over and everyone gives up after turning the practice hall into a full-blown WWE SmackDown. But wait, SpongeBob, channeling his inner motivational speaker, guilt trips everyone into pulling it together. Because, Squidward deserves this. Does he, though? Against all odds, the band somehow transforms from Please Never Play Again to Certified Legends. Fast forward to game day, Squidward is ready to fake some tragic excuse, but nope. The band rolls in, suited up and ready to shred. They take the stage and bam! It's so iconic, it knocks Squilliam out cold. Squidward, finally tasting a win, cartwheels into glory. Crimes and consequences. Let's break it down. False representation. Squidward straight up lies about having a band to impress Squilliam. This isn't just a bad idea, it's potentially fraud. Fines, $1,000 to $5,000, and the shame of almost face-planting in front of your nemesis? Priceless. Negligent endangerment. 2 flag twirlers got yeeted into a blimp during practice. If this were real life, Squidward would be paying hospital bills and lawyer fees faster than SpongeBob flips Krabby Patties. Fines could hit $2,500 plus civil liability. Between the lines, property damage, and accidental flag fatalities, Squidward should thank his lucky clarinet he didn't end up in Bikini Bottom jail. But hey, at least he got his sweet victory moment, and sometimes that's worth a few fines. And a restraining order from Sandy. In Professor Squidward, Squidward steps into the role of a teacher, but with his ego leading the way, it's no surprise things don't go as planned. Instead of teaching lessons, he ends up looking like the fool, because nothing says credibility like failing miserably at your own class. Okay, Squidward, listen up. If your life choices ever boil down to stealing someone else's identity to snag a job, maybe it's time to reevaluate. But alas, our tentacled anti-hero starts this episode bitterly attending Squilliam Fancyson's clarinet recital. Of course, watching his nemesis get fawned over leaves Squidward simmering in jealousy.
Isn't it grand?
What is?
He's such a great musician. He doesn't even have to touch an instrument to be brilliant.
All right, I've had enough. Bunch of nonsense.
When the headmistress of a music school mistakes him for Squilliam, the wheels of bad decisions start spinning. Even after clarifying he's not Squilliam, an honest moment that lasts for all of 2 bloody seconds, Squidward can't resist pretending to be his unibrowed rival to snag a sweet teaching gig.
My very own music class. Did you say Squilliam Fancy-son?
Yes.
I'm Squilliam Fancy-son.
But didn't you just say a minute ago that your name was Squidward Q Tentacles?
It is. No, I mean, no, I didn't.
Well, that's a relief. I mean, what kind of a moron would go to their worst enemy's music recital?
A very pathetic one, that's who.
Indeed.
Fast forward to his first day at the musical college where Squidward struts in wearing a wig and the air of someone clearly out of his depth. The class barely begins before chaos ensues. Naturally, our spongy boy nearly outs Squidward's scam within minutes. Squidward panics, slaps a gag order on them, and commands they call him Professor Squilliam from now until the end of time. That's not suspicious or tyrannical at all. The lesson starts, but SpongeBob and Patrick are in peak gremlin mode. SpongeBob can't stop giggling because Patrick's tickling his own feet. I guess this is what you get when tuition is free. Squidward tries rearranging the classroom like that'll fix anything, but it's futile. Patrick somehow miniaturizes himself to ride a toy train around the classroom, because logic is for quitters, and manages to derail the lesson further. Things spiral when Squidward tries introducing metronomes, only for SpongeBob and Patrick to fall into a hypnotic ticking trance. By the time the bell rings, Squidward has fully lost control, the class riots, and the real Squilliam arrives with the police. Squidward is arrested on the spot for impersonating a genius, a crime with surprisingly niche legal precedent. Meanwhile, our Spongy Boy and Patrick, back in their metronome trance, ticking away without a care in the world as the credits roll. Now for Squidward's growing rap sheet. False representation. Squidward impersonates Squilliam to land a teaching job, which, surprise, is illegal. Fines range from $1,000 to $5,000, plus his already fragile reputation is officially toast. Negligent endangerment. Letting Patrick miniaturize himself and ride a train? That feels like something OSHA wouldn't approve of. If anyone got hurt, Squidward could face fines up to $2,500 or civil lawsuits. In Boating Buddies, Squidward makes the mistake of pairing up with SpongeBob for driving school, thinking he could avoid responsibility. But surprise, surprise, it all backfires as Squidward's frustration turns into pure comedic disaster. Let's just say Squidward's smooth sailing didn't last long. We open with SpongeBob doing what SpongeBob does best, being painfully earnest while brushing Gary. That is, until he hears a strange noise outside. SpongeBob, of course, treats this as a major-ass discovery. Squidward offers him $5 to just go away. Apparently, Squidward's Silence Fund is a weekly subscription service. But SpongeBob decides to interpret this as follow Squidward to the ends of the earth. Squidward, being the eternal optimist we all know he isn't, tries to escape only to get immediately foiled by our spongy boy who somehow got a hold of Squidward's keys. How? Don't ask. It's SpongeBob logic. This lands Squidward in hot water with the law. A cop pulls him over, hands him a one-way ticket to Mrs. Puff's boating school, and Squidward's day officially goes from crap to I want to die. Cut to boating school, where Squidward, upon entering, immediately sees SpongeBob and breaks down crying. Same, Squiddy, same. Squidward then shares his tragic backstory about getting pulled over while SpongeBob breathes like Darth Vader on caffeine. So, after blatantly flirting with Mrs. Puff, Squidward sits down. SpongeBob then takes this moment to draw a masterpiece titled SpongeBob and Squidward, Best Boating Buddies Forever, which sounds like the title of Squidward's worst nightmare. Later, Squidward attempts to avoid SpongeBob during lunch by hiding in the bathroom. Classy move, brah. But when he sees what he thinks are SpongeBob's shoes, he goes full rage mode. Yeah, and it's not SpongeBob. It's a random tough guy, and Squidward's reward for this misunderstanding is an off-screen beatdown. He limps back to class just in time for Mrs. Puff to assign him to ride shotgun while SpongeBob drives. What follows is a boating disaster of epic proportions. SpongeBob and Mrs. Puff miraculously land in a water fountain back at school, while Squidward ends up in the bathroom, where his reward for survival is another beating. Back in class, it's test time, but Squidward's hands are too bandaged from his many injuries to even hold a bloody pencil. He's forced to ask our spongy boy for help. But when SpongeBob reminds him of his earlier "we're not buddies" tantrum, a helpful classmate replays Squidward's rant on a recorder. Busted! Squidward reluctantly admits they're boating buddies, but before they can finish the test, time runs out. The kick to the nuts? They both failed and have to come back next week. The episode ends with Squidward screaming into the abyss, which is honestly just his default setting at this point. In Good Neighbors, Squidward's plan to rid himself of SpongeBob and Patrick's noise quickly backfires. His attempts to be the ideal neighbor just end up turning his life into a full-on circus. Talk about making a fool of yourself in the pursuit of peace and quiet. This one starts off exactly the way we'd all want our Sunday mornings to go, with SpongeBob blasting a foghorn at the crack of dawn like the absolute bloody menace he is. Squidward is not thrilled. But SpongeBob, in his infinite wisdom, thinks the real problem isn't that he woke Squidward up for work on a Sunday. No, it must be that Squidward hasn't had his morning paper yet. Cue Patrick entering the chaos, mistaking the newspaper for a monster, and the two of them turning Squidward's front yard into a paper-shredding apocalypse. Squidward tries to salvage his day with some bonbons and a pedicure appointment, but SpongeBob and Patrick show up in the cultiest fezzes, roping him into their newly invented Good Neighbor Lodge. And as their first act of goodwill, things escalate quickly. Squidward ends up in the hospital thanks to paint-induced chickenpox confusion, and when he finally gets back home, SpongeBob and Patrick have hijacked his pedicure appointment. And understandably, Squidward snaps, banning them from ever bothering him again. And they don't listen. In an attempt to stop the madness, Squidward installs a high-tech security system, but SpongeBob and Patrick somehow manage to trigger that into malfunctioning too. Squidward's Sunday is officially ruined, and if that weren't bad enough, he, SpongeBob, and Patrick are all sentenced to court-ordered community service every Sunday forever for the damage caused. SpongeBob and Patrick are thrilled to hang out with him every week, while Squidward looks like he's about 2 seconds from exploding. Now let's break down the crimes. Disturbing the peace. SpongeBob and Patrick's relentless chaos, waking up the neighborhood, vandalizing trees, and unleashing a walking house, would absolutely earn them noise complaints. Fines could range from $500 to $2,500 and maybe some mandatory community service. Oh, wait, they're already doing that. Trespassing. How many times did these two just waltz into Squidward's house like they own the place? A restraining order feels overdue. SpongeBob and Patrick have fully ascended to terrorizing cult leaders in this episode, and Squidward is one evil laugh away from becoming a supervillain. Honestly, at this point, who could blame him? Let's dive into Bubble Stand, where Squidward's skepticism about SpongeBob's bubble-blowing skills turn into one big lesson in embarrassment. Squidward thinks he knows better, but when he tries to show off, it's not just the bubbles that pop, it's his dignity too. The chaos begins with SpongeBob hammering together a bubble stand right outside Squidward's house. More like assault on music. The stand is barely up for 5 seconds and business is booming before Squidward's blood pressure spikes. Squidward scoffs at the idea that bubble blowing could be considered art. Big talk from a guy who thinks his clarinet squawking is a gift to the world. But his curiosity gets the better of him. He mocks the duo while secretly itching to prove he can do better. And here, folks, is where Squidward writes his own comedy of errors. After begrudgingly paying a quarter, Squidward fumbles around with the bubble wand like a caveman discovering fire. What follows is Squidward's finest unintentional masterpiece, a giant bubble that not only impresses SpongeBob and Patrick, but also encapsulates his entire house. Rather than revel in his accidental genius, Squidward struts back inside, oblivious to the fact that his home is now airborne. It isn't until SpongeBob and Patrick frantically call out to him that he realizes he's floating miles above Bikini Bottom. Squidward's face when the bubble pops? Priceless. The house plummets back to Earth and Squidward finishes his day with a pitiful wheeze on his clarinet. Bravo, maestro. Squidward isn't the only fool here. SpongeBob and Patrick are practically daring the Bikini Bottom police to write them up. Let's discuss the fallout. Disturbing the peace. The crime? SpongeBob's hammering and elephantine bubble shenanigans turn the neighborhood into a circus. Potential sentence? SpongeBob could be slapped with a fine ranging from $500 to $2,500 or even community service for causing Squidward's clarinet dreams to crash and burn. Trespassing. The crime? SpongeBob's rogue elephant bubble infiltrates Squidward's home without permission. Potential sentence? SpongeBob, and maybe Patrick, could face fines of up to $1,500. Squidward might even slap them with a restraining order to keep them off his property. Our spongy boy may be the neighborhood menace, but Squidward's inability to stay in his lane keeps him firmly planted in Foolsville. In Crabborg, Squidward goes from voice of reason to full-blown lunatic in record time. Turns out, when it comes to making a fool of himself, Squidward's paranoia rivals SpongeBob's absurdity. Aw man, where do I even start with this one? SpongeBob's robot paranoia is on full blast after a late-night horror movie binge, and instead of just sleeping it off like a normal person, he takes his freak out to work. Squidward gets dragged into this nonsense, and things spiral from weird misunderstanding to legally questionable interrogation faster than Mr. Krabs can hum along to Electric Zoo. Here's the breakdown. SpongeBob overhears Mr. Krabs doing totally normal stuff, like dancing to a funky beat and boiling an egg. But because of the movie, it all looks suspiciously robotic to him. So what does he do? Instead of seeking therapy and maybe a nap, he ropes Squidward into testing their boss for signs of cybernetic life. When all of that shockingly fails, SpongeBob and Squidward go full conspiracy theory mode and declare Mr. Krabs of being a robot imposter. These two clowns take out their frustrations on Mr. Krabs' kitchen appliances, smashing everything from a toaster to his beloved cash register. Watching Squidward go full berserk with a baseball bat might be cathartic, but it's also hella illegal. Fines for this kind of destruction? $1,000 to $5,000 per item plus restitution. Let's just say Mr. Krabs is probably adding up the damages faster than you can say cha-ching. In Squilliam's Revenge, Squidward's desperate attempt to one-up his rival ends in classic humiliation. If Squilliam wasn't already laughing at him, the fake 5-star restaurant fiasco sealed the deal. Ah, Squidward, master of the humble brag. Except there's nothing humble about it and no brag to back it up. This time his jealousy of Squilliam Fancyson sends him tumbling into one of his most embarrassing failures yet. When Squiddy Boy bumps into Squilliam during his lunch break, things immediately go downhill. Why does he do it? Just why, brah? Maybe to wipe that smug smile off Squilliam's face, or maybe to prove it to himself that he's more than just a cashier of the Krusty Krab. Either way, he sets himself up for disaster. Squilliam decides to show up that very night with his entourage, forcing Squidward to beg Mr. Krabs to turn the Krusty Krab into a fine dining establishment. Mr. Krabs agrees, because money, duh, and the chaos begins. Squidward recruits SpongeBob and Patrick as staff, and the results are predictably disastrous. So Patrick's assaulting a hat rack, Krabs is serving up garbage-tier cuisine, and SpongeBob's having a mental breakdown so severe that he forgot his own name. Called it! Despite all this, SpongeBob manages to transform the Krusty Krab into a legitimate fine dining experience. But just when it seems like Squidward might pull off this charade, SpongeBob's memory wipe sends everything spiraling into bloody madness. Food flies, customers are terrorized, and Mr. Krabs' mutant appetizer, complete with a human foot, which I'm super sus about, wreaks havoc. In the end, Squidward has no choice but to come clean to Squilliam, confessing that he's just a cashier. But Squilliam's cruelty isn't done yet. He pretends to be a fraud too, only to reveal he's actually filthy stinkin' rich. He leaves the Krusty Krab in a literal flying casino while Squidward is left humiliated, crushed, and serenaded by the world's smallest violin courtesy of Krabs. So, what's the damage? Lying about success. Squidward's first mistake is opening his mouth. If he hadn't lied about owning a 5-star restaurant, none of this would have happened. Instead, he sets himself up for public humiliation by promising something he can't deliver. Incompetent leadership. Tasked with running a fancy restaurant, Squidward can't manage his staff, let alone himself. Squidward's Krabby Patty denial tour in just one bite ends exactly how you'd expect. Him stuffing his face like he's never seen food before. Turns out his dignity has fewer layers than that bun. Oh, Squidward, you magnificent mess of denial and bad decisions. This episode is your magnum opus of foolishness. It starts with Squidward doing what he does best, being a hater. While serving a king-sized Ultra Krabby Patty Supreme with mayonnaise, Squidward declares his utter disgust for Krabby Patties. But the catch? He's never even tasted one. And of course, SpongeBob can't let this injustice slide. Our porous pal is determined to enlighten Squidward's taste buds. So, our Spongy Boy is crushed by Squidward's performative rejection and leaves in defeat. But the twist? Old Squiddy Boy loves Krabby Patties. His taste buds finally wake up and he's hooked. Yeah, because he's Squidward, he can't just admit it. Oh no, that would be too easy. Instead, he spirals into full-blown secret addiction mode. His schemes range from placing fake orders to dumpster diving, none of which work because SpongeBob keeps thwarting him, albeit unintentionally. The descent into madness reaches its climax when Squidward dreams of marrying a giant Krabby Patty. Freud would have a field day with that one. Unable to resist, Squidward sneaks into the Krusty Krab at 3 a.m., tiptoeing past SpongeBob's house in what can only be described as the worst heist of all time. Inside, he triggers booby traps, gets doused in gasoline, and finally breaks into the Patty Vault, a treasure trove of ready-made Krabby Patties. Jackpot! But surprise! SpongeBob's already there. Why? Because my dude comes in at 3 a.m. to count sesame seeds, obviously. SpongeBob confronts Squidward, who finally snaps and confesses his undying love for Krabby Patties. It's all very dramatic. Squidward then proceeds to inhale the entire vault's supply while SpongeBob, the voice of reason for once, warns him not to overdo it. And Squidward overdoes it. In the most cartoonishly tragic turn of events, all the Krabby Patties go straight to his thighs before causing him to literally explode. The episode ends with Squidward's detached head in an ambulance while the paramedic casually reminisces about his first Krabby Patty like it's a coming-of-age milestone. Squidward's crimes and sentences: Krabby Patty addiction denial. Crime: lying to himself and everyone else about his feelings. Punishment: humiliation as his secret love for Krabby Patties is revealed in the most catastrophic way possible. Breaking and entering. Crime: sneaking into the Krusty Krab in the middle of the night. Punishment: booby trap burns and public embarrassment after being caught red-tentacled. In the grand tally of Squidward's attempts to impress, avoid, or outwit his colleagues, just one bite might be his most self-inflicted humiliation yet. He starts off as a snobby skeptic and ends up as a literal exploded meme. Bravo, Squidward. Bravo.